Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Forum of Hydrogen and Fuel Cells on Hanover Fair 2023. Welcome to the panel discussion, Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Mobility, Backbone for Secure Mobility. As you all know, decarbonizing mobility is a major task to meet the 2030 climate target plan to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55%. This will be achieved, of course, mainly by e-mobility, but hydrogen may also play its part in it. We are asking today, how can green hydrogen contribute to achieving the 2030 climate goals and create a secure mobility sector? How can the use of fuel cell technologies in heavy-duty transport contribute to reducing emissions in the transport sector? And what potentials does hydrogen and its derivatives have for existing fleets in our roads, rail, and as well as in shipping and aviation industry? So quite a lot of things we would like to discuss. And of course, you always have the opportunity to ask your questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll be with the microphone right with you. I would like to welcome my guests here on stage. Right next to me is Professor Dr. Klaus Bonhoff. He's Director General at the Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
I would like to welcome Philipp Glonner, co-founder and CEO of Arthur-Bus. Welcome. Andre Steinau is here, the co-chair of Clean Energy Partnership. I also would like to welcome Dr. Lars Thiesen, Head of Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technical Center, Central Europe at Stellantis AG. And last but not least, the second one who's inviting here to this round is Werner Diwald, Chairman of the Board of the German Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. And you're allowed to give these gentlemen a big hand now. Professor Bonhoff, for 11 years, you have been the speaker of the National Organization Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technology before you became head of policy issues at the Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport. And there you still work in favor of hydrogen mobility, as we all know. What would you say? What is your track record so far?
Well, that's a very tricky question. If you look at the media in the current discussions around energy in transport, decarbonizing transport, sometimes you get the impression that there is not that much that we do, but indeed we have a vast portfolio of programs to address decarbonization in transportation. So if I look back for the last 4 years when I've been in office at the ministry, that was when the climate protection law was put into law, which obviously gives us the goals that we need to achieve to decarbonize transport. We are looking into electrification via direct battery electric vehicles, so recharging infrastructure is one of the key issues that we are dealing with. But then we do argue, and I think it is absolutely necessary to do so, that on top of battery electric mobility, we need hydrogen in the transportation sector directly in fuel cells as well as for e-fuels. So we're looking at programs there also to support market ramp-up of those technologies.
Is it only you in the ministry who is supporting hydrogen mobility there, or do you have a broad of colleagues there who are helping you?
Within the ministry, there's a good amount of colleagues that do support me, obviously, in that role, and we have our departments that address specific issues within the government, and we have the ongoing discussion on the update of the National Hydrogen Strategy. It's not only the Ministry of Transport that argues in favor of also hydrogen in transportation, so we have friends.
That's good to hear, indeed. Mr. Steinau, as head of business unit hydrogen at GP Joule, you became co-chair of the Clean Energy Partnership. This is an industry partnership to establish green mobility with hydrogen and fuel cells, founded in 2002. What have you achieved in the last 21 years?
Oh, we have achieved many things, especially in form of discussions within the Clean Energy Partnership as a clean room for industrial players. We achieved fueling protocols which are available and usable all over the world. We expanded also the members of the Clean Energy Partnership. At the moment, I think in total 23, 24. So a good achievement, and we are pushing the industry working on technologies together and bringing these hydrogen mobility into a large scale, and also having the good talks to the ministry, to all the also European entities where we need the discussions and also the political decisions to start and to expand in the hydrogen mobility.
But 21
sector.
years is a very long time. It didn't take that long to bring a man on the moon. What are your next steps?
So one part of the story of Clean Energy Partnership was the establishing of the H2 mobility. So in total now we have in Germany 94 or 95 hydrogen refueling stations, and the next steps are expanding this network not only with hydrogen, with H2 mobility, also with other players, that we have roughly 400 stations within the next years. So this will be the main target at the moment. And to have fueling protocols also for the heavy-duty sector, not only for the light vehicles, also heavy-duty vehicles, and to expand also in other mobility sectors like maritime sector and also the aircraft sector.
And the almost 100 hydrogen refueling station is worldwide unique. We really have to say that. So Germany is there as a forerunner.
Yep.
Dr. Thiesen, we know each other since almost 30 years already. So I remember when you presented the Opel Hydrogen here on the group exhibit in the early 2000s. It never became a serious vehicle. You never went to market with this excellent car. Why not?
Yeah, I think it was too early, to be honest. And this is why we now are focusing on a different vehicle segment, so on light commercial vehicles at Stellantis with its three brands, Citroën, Peugeot and Opel. So we have a car offer in the market, light commercial vehicles, so that's a 3.5-ton panel van. And we do this because we think we need fuel cell electric vehicles in addition to battery electric ones.
We come to that in a second, but first I would like to know how frustrating is it for an engineer to wait 30 years for the first fuel cell car?
No, it's the other way around. It has always been my goal to have one car in the market as long as I'm in the company, and we have it now. So that's how you have to turn it.
Right. Finally, you achieved your goal. So now you just said it. You brought the Vivaro E hydrogen to the market.
Yeah.
It's actually a fuel cell plug-in hybrid. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, so basically it's based on the battery electric version that is a mass product already in the market since a few years. Which sells quite well, honestly. And but we see if we have to go to zero emission for all our customers, and our focus is fleet customers, so B2B business, then there are a lot of customers who cannot do their operational model with battery electric vehicles because they either do not have the opportunity to recharge the vehicles or they are simply not the time to do it. So these kind of customers have to rely on, if you like to call it the old model, where you have a refueling station which you enter with your vehicle, where you refuel within 3 minutes or put the energy into your vehicle and then you can depart again. So that's a quite important aspect here. For example, our first customer was the well-known company Miele, you know, the dishwasher, washing machine company. And so their model is they have their service technicians, they all have their dedicated vehicle which they use for their work. But they don't, not all of them does have a private home to be able to recharge at night, but they have to do their business next morning again. So they have to park on the street and then continue their work next morning. And to come to the plug-in aspect, so as we are now offering the vehicle in two first markets, which is Germany as well as France, we have decided to go for this concept. For example, we already heard about the roughly 100 stations that we have in Germany right now. In France, it's less. And to enable the customers to also recharge the vehicle and go on the battery alone, it's 50 kilometers. Hydrogen is 350, so it's 400 all over. But you can also run the vehicle on the battery alone to find the next station.
I think it's also a clever solution to argue against the efficiency argument that comes out always between battery and fuel cell cars. So you can the best of two worlds.
Yeah, that's exactly the case.
Good. Mr. Glonner, I'm honored to have for the first time in my life a business punk on stage. At least someone who is on the watch list of Business Punk magazine. So, what makes you a business punk?
Well, you mentioned before the, how did you say, going to the moon, right?
Yeah, right. Good.
So 2 years ago when we started the company, it was our second to last meeting when we wanted to go to the notary and actually started our business. And my co-founder asked me, I mean, we had advisors on the board and everybody saying, no, this is not going to happen. And basically he said, how hard is it going to be to just build a commercial vehicle as a bus to make it the most efficient on the market? And you know, the Americans made it to the moon. How hard can it be? And basically I said, it's going to be easy. And yeah, that probably makes me a punk because I was the only one who thought it's easy. But 2 years later, the bus is completely developed by us, independent frame. I would say looking at the sort profiles, most efficient on the market. And it's being operated right now on the European market from operators. Yeah.
Mr. Glonner, Arthur offers zero-emission buses for public transport.
Yes.
You mentioned that, but you don't really care whether it's hydrogen or it's battery electric vehicles. For what applications are which solution?
It depends on the use case, and that's exactly the question or which polarizes the most when we discuss zero-emission mobility. We want to bring as many people from A to B emission-free. So that's why we started doing a bus. So if you look at the use case, maybe the city center, for example, of some cities, if they're able to charge, if they're able to park the buses, if they have whatever the grid capacity to charge these big buses, use a battery bus. Why not? If the cycle that the bus has to run is, let's say, limited to 200 kilometers per day. But if you go to the outskirts of a city, for example.
And if it's hilly.
Exactly. Or if you have to connect cities, then you have a problem. Because you need to have the convenience to charge fast within, I don't know, 8 to 10 minutes and go again. And you need range. And that's basically where the hydrogen use case really can show why it's on the market, why it's being operated. And for me, there's no discussion why it should be there. It is already there. And we should start, fund, how do you say, the operational costs behind it. Because new technology needs new funding schemes to make it actually, you know, work on the market. Because there's still some, like I would say, blind spots that we are discussing. And it's certainly not the case. Because public transport is something that we need. And that's something that doesn't need to be discussed. If I go to the work at 8 in the morning, I want my bus to be there. But if I want it to be clean, we need to discuss both technologies.
Yeah. I agree. And Mr. Diwald, and you probably too, to discuss both technologies. And there is a program from the EU called Clean Vehicle Directive, which is forcing companies and operators to make their fleets green. These are the ways that helps startups like Arthur, doesn't it?
A lot.
Yes, of course. I think each regulation which promote green mobility is helpful. Perhaps it could be a little bit more concrete. It could be a little bit, give more investment security. So it's nice that somebody mentioned you have to drive green. But when it starts, when really the first orders come to the companies, is a little bit the question. We see, I think, that everybody waits and look on it and say, oh, it's a big challenge and we have to change. But when we start, and the first mover perhaps is not the winner because he pay a high price, and so all the companies are in competition. And so I think we need more regulation, and in the beginning we need, of course, some subsidies and perhaps intelligent subsidy programs to create really a ramp up so that I have some confidential to invest in this new technologies. And then I think it must be more this, or we need a decision also from the government. I think it's not only the decision can come from the market. What is the right technology? Or do we have to secure that all the technologies are available in 2030? So it will be really a catastrophe if we suddenly come nearly to 2030 and perhaps you have only focus on one technology, and then we see this technology is not really working in a renewable energy world. It's not the right technology. And then, what do we then? There's not another choice of technologies, and then we have a big, big problem to reach our climate targets.
Right. And to whomever I speak from the hydrogen world, they will all agree there's no competition between battery electric and hydrogen mobility. There will be a coexistence of both technologies, and I think you will all agree to that point again. But what share will and should fuel cell and hydrogen mobility have by 2030 to contribute to achieving climate goals and to create a secure mobility sector in your mind? What share should it be?
I'm sure that it is bigger than we expect today.
If I see 60%, what do you think?
I think it depends also, of course, on the sector. So in the individual mobility and the small passengers cars, it will be more battery cars, and in the heavy duty, it will be more hydrogen. But when I see some studies from Agora, for example, they say in heavy duty, we will see in the end a share of 0.x%, 0.5 or whatever. So I expect more that it will be more than 50%, if it's 60, 70. I think, in my view, it's not important if I see the numbers, what we have today. You mentioned it before, 30 years, and now we get the first mass car in the market. Is it really important if it's 60%, 40%, 30%? It will be a huge amount of fuel cell cars which we need in the market. And we are now on the starting point, so it's more than 100,000 cars, and that is a huge amount what we can bring in.
I would disagree. It's not the first mass car. There was Toyota and Hyundai also.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, but the first maybe from Europe or United States. Professor Bonhoff, you were raising your hand, and I was asking myself as well, what will be the share? And maybe we get a clue when we look at the subsidies. For instance, Germany has invested 2 billion euros in charging stations for electric vehicles, but only 50 million euros for hydrogen filling stations. Is that maybe the ratio? We will get 40 BEVs and 1 fuel cell vehicle.
Not sure that those figures are correct. If I look at the amount of funding we provided over the years to make sure that we now do have 100 stations, hydrogen stations installed in Germany, it is definitely more than the 50 million that you mentioned. So statistics are always something to look into very closely. No, I wanted to add just one figure, since we have the results from our clean room talks with the industry on the heavy duty vehicle side. And the question indeed was, how do you see a ramp up of zero emission vehicles in the heavy duty sector by 2030? And collectively the industry said 75% of new vehicle sales by 2030 will be zero emission, and around about 1/4 of that are fuel cell vehicles. So that's the industry view that we get at this point in time. Whether that's correct or not, nobody knows. We'll see by 2030. But the key message is it's a meaningful part of a future mobility.
But that also means we have to do a lot of investment into the infrastructure, right?
And that's what we're doing. And regulation was also mentioned. Obviously, the Clean Vehicle Directives help to bring the vehicles into the market when it comes to public purchase programs. The other very important regulation that is now close to finalization is the AFIR, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation. We will have binding targets for every member state in the European Union to build not only recharging infrastructure, but also hydrogen stations. Along the 10T corridors, every 200 kilometers within the urban nodes, there need to be a certain amount of hydrogen stations. So it's not the question anymore, will this happen or not? Yes, it will happen, because legally it has to happen. We as Germany are well prepared with the CEP, with all of our activities, with H2 mobility and everything we've done over the last 20 years, talking about track record. But I think it's worthwhile to consider how can we now also, with the knowledge that we have, help other member states and support other member states to fulfill what is legally required. On top of that, regulation is fine. Funding is also nice. Sometimes we hear from industry, so de-risking the market ramp-up is something that we do support. We have an ongoing open call in our National Innovation Program for hydrogen stations until May. So this is, as we speak, ongoing. And we have other funding programs to support buying the vehicles. in a technology-neutral way. We don't care whether it's batteries or fuel cells as long as it's zero emission. What proves out to happen in the market is that around about 20% of the vehicles that are then funded in these programs, whether it's buses, whether it's heavy-duty trucks, whether it's trains, are fuel cell vehicles.
Good to hear, indeed. Mr. Steinau, you would like to mention?
I would agree, Werner Diwald, because I think the driver of the percentage of the hydrogen mobility within the zero emission business will be the commercial mobility. Because if you have to earn money with your mobility business, and time is money, you will focus on less fueling time, you will focus on solutions where you don't, where you are not dependent on grid connection issues and so on. And I think this will be the driver, because the commercial business has a big pain. They have to reduce their carbon emissions very, very soon. This is not a 2030 goal. Sometimes it's a shorter goal, and they push us to bring vehicles into the market, whether it's the bus or a light commercial vehicle. By the way, we will get our next Stellantis car next week from you. So, and also in the heavy-duty business, when you have to transport goods, it has to be fast and available. And we will see, for sure, electric battery trucks. But I think the main part of the trucking business will be hydrogen.
Okay. I would like to give also you the opportunity to ask your questions. And there is one from Sven Geitmann.
Hello, Sven Geitmann, H2 Magazine, Hydroguide Publishing House. I have one specific question to Mr. Bonhoff. We just heard that the mobility sector has not to fulfill its own goals. Instead, the heat sector and the economic sector has to fulfill the goals, but the mobility sector is free to do whatever he wants. It appears so in the media. From my impression, it was in the last years a success that each sector, mobility sector, heat and so on, had its own goals. Now there is one large goal, but the mobility sector has no goals anymore for CO2 emissions. Is it a success for the mobility sector, or what is your opinion about this?
What a political question, and you have to answer now for your minister.
Yeah, that's sometimes the fate. I rather stick to the facts than reading the media on these issues. What happened a couple of weeks ago within the coalition group was that what is also already written down in the coalition treatment, that we're looking at how to update, for not finding a better word for it, the climate protection law that we have. And it was said in the coalition treatment that this government will look at that and will look into finding a way of a sector overarching reaching of the goals. So the climate protection law as it is in place right now gives us targets per sector. And yes, indeed, the transportation sector as well as the building sector have not reached their targets the last couple of years. Although I must admit that during Corona it was easy to kind of lower CO2. But now we're post-Corona and we still see a fairly substantial amount less CO2 emissions in the transportation sector. So there is some effects already that are not associated to Corona. But the political agreement indeed a couple of weeks ago was to update this law to find a more flexible model to react to the overarching goal of CO2 reduction. It's not that transportation doesn't have to do anything anymore. No, not at all. And if we look at our programs and you know what we have in the pipeline, there's massive programs underway. But politically speaking, it's a more flexible way that this government is looking into to reach the overall target without blaming individual sectors, which doesn't for us mean we don't do anything and blame the others for not reaching their targets. No, not at all. We're still very motivated to even put more dynamics into CO2 reduction in the transport sector.
Okay, I have one more question from the audience. This gentleman over there, if you come a bit closer, please. would make it a bit easier for me to give you the microphone. Just introduce yourself and ask your question.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Saiteja. I'm from Chemnitz, Saxony. My question is, how integrated your projects are with global partnerships? For example, if I want to build a plant in US, Germany, and also in India, so how flexible you are in sharing technologies or services or anything, until unless we have a problem like Suez Canal. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for that question. Maybe, Mr. Thiesen, you could easily say, well, our Stellantis is worldwide, you know, so we are integrated at all.
Yes, I mean, it's a global company, of course. We are number 4 in the OEM world, and we just merged 2 years ago with Fiat Chrysler, Peugeot, Citroën, Fiat Chrysler, so we now have Germans, US people from France and Italy and so on, and a lot of other nations in our company, so it's already global. Yeah, so I agree to what you said.
Okay. Mr. Glonner, you would like to answer to that?
Yes, I mean, to the colleague in this audience, thank you for the question, because the answer is simply yes. We do develop cloud-based, so we are happy to partner up with manufacturing partners abroad, and we are even discussing Latin America and other projects, because it's simply not just, you cannot do everything on your own. And that's why you need to create those synergy effects on the market to establish this overall goal together. And basically, it's a simple yes.
A short answer from you, Mr. Bonhoff.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for the question, because we've been discussing decarbonizing transport and what role hydrogen and fuel cells can play, but you cannot discuss hydrogen and fuel cells without the global context. And if I look at the hydrogen story as a whole, it is about how do we make sure that we get renewable energy at the end at 100% into the energy system, and this will only be achievable globally, and this is only achievable via the flexibility option of hydrogen to transport it and so forth. So even politically, the German government, which is not within our responsibility, but within the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Protection, is of course promoting and driving forward international partnerships in the energy sector. We as Mobility then say, okay, if you're discussing that on the energy side, we also want to make sure that we get green molecules for the transportation sector, and we're looking into also bilateral political discussions to support industrial collaboration on an international level.
And last answer to that, Mr. Diwald, then we go to another topic.
Yeah, I think the best evidence that we work together globally is the standardization for tanking. So that is standardized really globally. We have, if you compare it with electricity, it's not happens in Europe, but with hydrogen or for hydrogen cars, we have a standard to tank or for tanking the hydrogen in the cars. So that's really, I think, the best evidence that we work together.
Mr. Steinau, I heard you have already ordered a Stellantis car, and that's not the only car you ordered at GP Joule. It's always you're in the doing, I really can say. But please tell me, you have ordered 5,000 heavy-duty trucks at Clean Logistics, and this supplier unfortunately went bankrupt. What now?
Yeah, this is really a pity that one of the business punks in the business, Clean Logistics, is not able to deliver these 5,000 trucks anymore. But it's also a pity when you are a startup and publicly listed and you have to announce everything. So you have also the you have a good publicity when you can announce 5,000 trucks, but you have also the bad publicity if you announce, oh, I have some trouble with my money. So and this cannot help in this kind of phase of the business. So in the meantime, and beneath Clean Logistics, we have also different contracts with other suppliers, and we will get trucks within the next years. We get also some fundings now from the actual call, and we will have trucks by end of the next year, the first ones, and we will be perhaps 1 year later to have the 5,000 trucks in the market. So we expected the 5,000 trucks within the next 5 years in the market, and I guess perhaps it's just 1 year later.
If you find an OEM for that, yes.
There are definitely OEMs in the market. they will provide us the trucks. And not only us, also the others. So we have to establish the infrastructure for this.
Right.
Without the trucks, I cannot invest in infrastructure. We are talking about a multi-million business, and without trucks, without offtake, there will not be any financial partner to finance this infrastructure.
And Mr. Thiesen, everybody's talking about heavy-duty trucks at the moment. Why are you exactly going into light-duty trucks? You know, it's not fashionable at the moment, is it?
Yeah, you're correct. So everybody's talking about heavy-duty truck, and very often in the discussion, it's taken versus passenger cars. So, and there is a huge segment in between of those ones, which is light commercial vehicles. And these vehicles, as we know today, if we have like parcel delivery that everybody of us gets every day to your home, that's a very important area where we need this. All this services business is relying on these kind of vehicles, as are the craftsmen, for example. And so that's the reason why we, given our standard portfolio within Stellantis, we decided to go for this kind of vehicles. We will be raising our production capacity this year up to 1,000 units a year, and next year we plan to go also for the light commercial vehicle one step higher. So we have two different sizes, and we will also go to the next level, and then we will raise production up to 5,000 units per year. But it all, of course, this is production capacity. It always depends on having customers who are really willing to purchase those vehicles. Yeah. And there we come to a very important aspect.
That's right. I would like to ask that, please. Because when you ask for fundings, especially in Germany, you've got a little problem, because you only save a little bit of CO2, and not like the heavy-duty trucks who save a lot of CO2, so you won't get the fundings then, no?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important thing, that we have some very powerful funding mechanisms in place in Germany. However, the problem is that relative to the commercial vehicles, all the sizes are compared in the funding program with the single call. So that means that indeed so-called N1 vehicles with a 3.5-ton class are compared to 50-ton vehicles, so heavy-duty trucks. And just to give you an imagination, so one heavy-duty long-haul truck driven on the highway equals 50 light commercial vehicles. So you could say, if you enter the stage arguing that it all needs to be about avoided CO2, yes, then this is the physics. On the other hand side, we have all these businesses that I just mentioned who are dependent on also getting zero-emission vehicles, and we also want to reduce emissions, not only CO2 but also harmful emission in urban and peri-urban areas. And if things stay like they are, we will only reduce this in the long-haul truck application on the highway. So it's very important that we look also into those different kind of sectors of usages of vehicles, and they need to be funded for these, not forever, but for these first years where we really need to develop the market.
Maybe a point Mr. Bonhoff will think about it. Mr. Glonner, I would like to address you. Again, when you contact your customers, your operators, even suppliers, you know, you will probably often hear, "Who the F is Arthur?" You know, so is it hard to get into a business as a startup in a very conservative market?
Oh yes, it's. I would say even on the German market, it's the biggest challenge that you can have as a new company. Also discussing with banks, you know. You need to basically, as a startup in Germany, break even for the next 10 years. Should have 10 million on the bank account and have 15 customers, and everybody should be happy. But in the real world, we're just waiting for the Americans to establish the new solution and whatever. And that really annoys me a lot. And also the way, basically how it works in this very conservative industry of buses. I mean, what we do is, I basically call, they say, "Who the F are you?" But then if you show up with the bus and say, "Why don't you just drive it?" They basically say, "I like it. And now I would like to buy it probably." But then one thing starts. One is the funding that we have for actually buying the vehicle. And we have those funding seasons, which annoy me the most, because we're just waiting for those big calls, you know, for when is the next funding call? When is the next funding call? I mean, we are talking about public transport. They buy a bus for public transport. They're not going to drive to Spain with it privately. What are we discussing here? I mean, if we look at Corona, we had a funding problem which was to react fast, allocate the money when it's needed. You need to buy a vehicle, give the customer the money, very simply. And the second part, which annoys me, is OPEX. It's a big discussion. Operating expenses. We are talking about commercial vehicles. They're heavy duty. And they have to have a total cost of ownership over 10 to 15 years. And therefore, we need more support in the field, THG quotas or whatever it is. But it needs to happen, finally. Because that's what really helps the customers to actually act upon what they are needed to do. It's called Clean Vehicle Directive. Get rid of the diesel, have a clean vehicle. But help them actually get the vehicle and help them operate it. And that's basically, you know, as a new company, that's one challenge, but it would be certainly a lot easier.
Professor Bonhoff, couldn't we make Mr. Glonner's world a little bit easier? At the moment, 80% of the additional costs for the purchase of a hydrogen bus are subsidized, which is quite high. But he would be happy if it would be 100%, so the operators don't have to pay for the climate change.
Exactly, it's a public need. Why do we have to discuss this? I mean, more costs. Like, what is the...
That was my question, Mr. Glonner.
First of all,
sorry for that.
No, I think it is also fair to say that the program that we do have is unique in Europe. And everybody else is looking at Germany saying, wow, how did you do that? And getting agreement from the European Commission to fund 80% of the delta cost wasn't so easy. And state aid laws is something we could discuss for at least an hour if we wanted to. I'm not sure we do want to do that. But in the end, under the existing state aid framework that we have in Europe, these 80% with the rules we had to put into place to then operate the program is where we are, and which is a huge driver. And we see that in the individual calls that we have. Why do we do calls? Because we need to make these funding programs manageable in some way. Is that the right mechanism once we scale up in volume? Possibly not. So we're always open to learn from, ongoing activities and see how can we adapt programs. Bear in mind we have to go back to Brussels and ask them, of the rules and procedures. I think these 80% is already a huge driver. In the end, whoever is providing public services in the transportation sector will have to comply with the Clean Vehicles Directive, so that transformation is, from a regulatory perspective, driven forward, and we are de-risking with public money in order to get there. In the end, 100% zero-emission vehicles in the market cannot be fully subsidized and paid for by the public money that we have, unless you assume that it is public money that is contracting the bus operators to provide their services. But that's public money on a separate level.
I can understand that completely. It's also my money, by the way. But anyway, I would like to wish it would be that way. Gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry that we couldn't discuss synfuels because we need probably synfuels for our existing fleet to decarbonize it. We couldn't talk about trains. We couldn't talk about aviation or ships. There's just too many topics here. But I think what we talked about was highly interesting, at least for me. I hope for you as well. I'd like to thank you all here in my round. I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you.